In this video, I want to see if I can spike on an event sourcing idea. So let's finish the color, and I've got a list of to-dos that I want to do, but I kind of want to take a detour about building features and maybe change the underlying API. And the reason I think that might be good to do now is before I really solidified the API. Currently, the API that we have is very much space-centric. You can create a space, you can add entities in the space, you can, and it will also broadcast. You can change, add some components, update some components, and these will modify the database structure underneath. And although the API doesn't need you to know the structure exactly, it's very one-to-one mapping. Um, but we don't have an API outside of the spaces. For example, what about the people? What about building the space and having an API to see, uh, to do a tutorial, like show me a pre-recorded VR lesson. I think that might be unique for this kind of space. And currently, this API doesn't really support that. People and their movements are ephemeral. So the first idea in event sourcing is that events are the first class citizen. Citizen. And we need to store those. So persist the events. Then we can have everything else follow, like build projections, etc. So let's go and build the events. So in our lib, the XR, we can create a folder called events. And in this events, let's create some files in here. So one of them, maybe a file per event type. So this might be, well, create a space could be an event. Sure. Or maybe this is limited to within a space, let's say. So maybe create entity could be an event. So that in the past tense, it would be entity created. And it would have the type. So in here, I can do a define a module called the XR events entity created. And how would you define attributes? I think it would be, I need an example, def struct. Define structure. So the entity needs a couple things. What was this again? Okay, it can be a list of key value pairs. So we can have UUID. It can have a name. Actually, just be ID, right? ID, name. Maybe depending on the type of entity, it could have components. Oh, it needs a type for sure. So these could be the top level components. Okay, and what else can you do? So you can, entity can be created. Correspondingly, an entity could be deleted. So entity deleted. And to do this, def module the XR events entity deleted. And what would we do here? Def struct. Just give me the ID to delete. It's probably the easiest thing. Must be a list. Okay, it's a list. And so you can create one, you can delete one. What else can you do? You can parent one to the other. Entity parented. So entity parented. And let's just grab some boilerplate here. Entity parented. So we can set two IDs. So we need the child ID and the parent ID. Okay. What else? So that will parent, and then you can also break this relation, so you can unparent. So entity unparented. So it doesn't matter who it was. You just say here's an entity and it can't have any parents. Now of components, you need the component name and an entity. Oh, we also need the space. All of these need space ID. That's probably the still most efficient way to access the ID is through the space ID. So entity created needs a space ID. Entity deleted perhaps does not. But if you're going to broadcast it on the space ID, it's better to have it. That way you can, it's better to have it. So let's say space ID, all of these. So space ID is kind of the aggregate root here. Space ID, and you can okay, what else? Someone can move something, so I think it's better to say that something was moved, scaled, and rotated. Or transformed, in which case they can specify all of them. Or you could say transformed and then specify which of the ones you want to include. And if you don't include them, then they're optional. Entity transformed. Space ID, the ID, and then optionally position, rotation, and scale. Scaling. Then maybe you can set the color. Entity colored. Okay. And you could set the alpha, like the transparency, visibility. So I think this is enough. This is the entire API of what we have and then some. Like we don't even have the unparented. So we've got transformed, deleted, created, colored. And that's really the whole API of what we have so far. We've got some types though. So in the creation, created, we have some types. And maybe these could be pulled into different events. Like box created, spawn point created. Like I sort of feel like that's more valuable in terms of specificity. Otherwise, we'll have a single event that's weighing heavily on maybe different kinds of components and type here versus being enumerated like, oh, all these entities can be created. That way we could get more specific with what kind of components are necessary. So I kind of like that. Okay, let's remove this one then. And put in box created. So we don't need the type, but we can have the position, rotation, and the scaling. We can have one for a grid created, and this can be grid created, and this would be it can have maybe the size, or maybe the length and width, maybe. Width and depth, or size. Cone created. Cone created. Space ID name. Yep. Okay. Maybe one more. Sphere created. Sphere created. All of these could be enhanced by who's creating it. And what about people events? So somebody can enter, somebody can leave. I can say member entered. Space ID, the ID of the member, and the position, rotation, and scaling. I think this actually pans out. Yeah, you can have a name, a nickname. That way, when you draw them, you can draw the nickname, right? And scaling is appropriate too, because you can become big, you can be small. And if a person left, member left is the opposite. That'll just be the same thing as when something is deleted, right? Member left, space ID, and the ID of the person. Okay. So the person can move. What is movement? Is it moving your head, moving forward, moving your hands? I kind of think it's all of it, but I also think these kind of need timestamps, right? We need the originating timestamp because we don't quite know when the server is going to get it. Make that an enhancement. So let's say member movements. You can move. So member moved. And you can have the head left and right controllers. So really, this is the entire application of what we have, minus some primitives and minus opening and closing menus, which just facilitate them to invoke these things. There's one more thing, is member mute. Member muted. Member muted. Member unmuted. Now, apart from moving, it might be good to know whether they teleported. That way you could play a different kind of animation. But I'm really liking this API. I like how everything you can do is just like a 20 files here. You can just look at this folder and see what your app is capable of doing. How succinct and expressive this is. Forgot one. Spawn point created, which is really just spawn point created. It will have a position. Might need some metadata, not sure. Yeah, it needs a name. Okay, so now we can write a test that sends these messages somewhere. Suppose you construct these things. You need to send them to some server that can receive it. Right, so let's go and create a test. And so we've got a spaces test. Let's do an events test. So what was the boilerplate in here? Data use case. And could it actually talk to a gen server? How about the web? Live connection case. Okay, just start with connection case. This will be events test, and every test. Okay, so we have a describe block and then test. All right, what do we want to test? I want to test send events to a. Where will you send them? Okay, when we're calling GraphQL, we'll send a command and it'll go through a resolver. A mutation will go through a resolver. The resolver will call some context function. The context function will probably construct the event and pipe it along. So here is maybe a little lower level. We're piping the message along to a gen server. What's there to test here? I think what we want to test is that a projection is created, right? The listening side, because you can't really, I mean, you just receive the events in order. What's there to do? Well, you just want to set up that you have this facility. You can send the events somewhere. So we can alias the XR events does that mean I can use just box created? No. To do this. Can you do that? No. I don't really have to alias them. Okay. So let's say events equal, so list of things, the XR, okay, so these are now structs. So first a member entered. Okay, where is that? Events. I didn't save it. Okay, go back to the test. Member entered. And what goes in here? It's our dot events dot. Let's see, he created the grid. And there's no documentation. Let's see. We do need to create a space. So we probably need to import space fixture. If we do that here, we did import space fixtures here, which will create a space. Is there a way to get a UUID? I think there is. It's called the Ecto UUID or something. Generate. And a name is Bob. Grid created. Space ID, Ecto UUID, generate. Name. Great. Okay, so we've got these two events. If I run this test now, mix test, the XR's events, it tests nothing. Okay. And we want to send them somewhere. So we could go through the list and inspect, what is this, the event dot, or just inspect the event, sure. Yeah, the first one was number entered and then grid created, so it goes through the beginning. Sure, yes. And we want to be able to pipe them to something, right? So this space simply created an entry, and that's fine. Now, in order to load the space, we have to, I think, go to spaces. What's in the controller? Space controller. How do we do that there? So spaces get spaced by slug. In case of space, in case it's nil, do nothing. Otherwise, you nudge the space. What does that do? Space supervisor start the space, and this returns nothing, I guess. Okay, so we can do this. Starts the space with a slug. Since the slug can be changed, yeah, I'm doubling down that it's probably a good idea to use IDs, immutable IDs. So let's go back to the events test, and we want to start this based on the slug. That starts the server. Then we want to send it a message, which would be EXR space server, and then it should be a handle cast. No. It's got to be an external API. So let's go to space server. What do we have here? PID, safe call, init, handle call, and info terminate. Okay, not a lot here. So we want it to be able to take an event. It shouldn't be down here because all the handle stuff is internal. As an external caller, I need to just let's say process event. So interesting. These are all calls. There's no cast in here. We're not calling this server a lot. Okay, so process event. And we're gonna need the what? The slug and the event. And we'll just let's see, think about it. If we're doing this from an API, event handle, you're probably going to have the slug and you want to do a handle cast. Okay, so if we did that, it should error out because we don't have a handler, which is fine. So we'll go event process event. The slug is space.slug and event. Do this, test it. So I don't know what happened here, but we can just simulate it. So we know that we have currently make a space, call it the slug A. So we can start the server. That's our PID, okay. And we can define these event, okay. So space equals spaces get space by slug. So space ID, yeah, that would be okay. Then we can make some events. Copy that. Oops. Copy that. Paste that. All right. Maybe we can just do this DXR space server process event space dot slug, and event is this DXR events, whatever, it doesn't matter, it's gonna break. Oop. Okay, something, okay, gen server terminating, attempted to cast, but no handle cast clause was provided. Okay, so let's try a handle cast. Put it in there. And we need to wait here, right? Handle cast. We get the, let's start it off with event and event. And then switches to that. No reply. A new state. And this is a, so we'll do it this way. Event. So the supervisor should have recreated it. Let's try this again. Boop. No handle cast clause was provided. Try again. Still no. Close it. Server. Start the space. And assign space. Process event. Okay. Didn't do anything. But it received it. It received it. Handle cast. What's this thing? The event was unused. Okay, let's just inspect. And we could stash it into some events list. So that would mean that the state, see after start link, and we go OK. OK in the slug, and we get movements. These are two ets tables. Maybe these should be someplace else. But anyway, events could be this. And every time we get something, we can just pop that into state dot events. Well, we can't mutate it like that. We've got to do map dot merge. Take the old state, and the new state will be something with a state and the event and state events. And put all that becomes the new state. Fine with that. that would stash it into the state. So that when we want to get a summary, okay, so let's recompile. Do that. Oops. Key events not found in blah. Should be created right here. Events. Oh, sorry. It should be like this. Events. Or can you just do like this and state pipe events with event and state events? Can you do that? Start the space. Assigns. And then add something in there. Add something in there again. Add a different. There's like member entered or something. So you got all these kind of phony messages and ask for a summary. What is it? Handle call summary. I don't think there's a way to get a summary anymore. So, oops. Summary. There's no way to get this. So let's add that back. Anyway, you can just see Elixir inspect gen server state. Sys get state. Well, that's cool. So DXR space server PID space slug. No? What's this? Oh. Space server. Okay, this gives you a PID. And then you can do sys dot what now? Get state with the PID. And look at that. We have events. Number entered. Yeah, the latest is at the top. So you would have to reverse this in order to stash that someplace else. Okay, so our test doesn't quite perform the way we want it to because we have to figure out how to wait in a test. question says he wants to get rid of sleep. He was sleep for cause to start check for until it is registered. Trigger message. Look up. But since I don't have a time when it's done, we can just do this. Events test is process sleep for 10 milliseconds. Then do check events in Gen server. None of this is really the behavior I want to test, but it's just some intermediate stuff to make me feel better. I might end up tearing this down later. Anyway, I'm tired. Let's go to bed.